Merci à tous et toutes de venir si nombreux. Je m'appelle Antoine Chisdivallé, je suis coordinateur des tables rondes et des ateliers pour la Société historique du Canada cette année, en partenariat avec mon collègue Dave Hazen, qui n'est pas là aujourd'hui. Cette table ronde s'intitule « Les sociétés historiques et l'étude du passé », en anglais « Historical Societies and the Study of the Past ». Je fais un grand merci à tous ceux qui vont présenter aujourd'hui et qui viennent assister avec nous. Personnellement, je vous parle aujourd'hui de la région de la capitale nationale, à Gatineau, et donc je vais faire une revendication, une reconnaissance territoriale liée à cette région. J'aimerais souligner que les terres sur lesquelles je suis aujourd'hui font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple Anishinaabe algonquin. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am today is traditional unceded territory for the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Comme nos panélistes et notre audience se joignent de nombreuses régions du Canada aujourd'hui, je crois qu'il est important de se rappeler de l'histoire et de réfléchir au présent des peuples autochtones du pays. Since we are here, everybody coming from different regions of Canada, I do think it is important and relevant to remind ourselves of the history of Indigenous people and their present as well. Sans plus tarder, je vais laisser la parole à Jean-Louis Vallée, notre président de séance aujourd'hui, qui va pouvoir nous introduire nos participants. Bonne rencontre.
Merci. Au nom de la Fédération Histoire Québec et de nos collègues de la Société d'Histoire du Canada, j'aimerais vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce colloque qui, je l'espère, sera ouvrir les portes à une plus étroite collaboration entre chacune de nos fédérations de sociétés d'histoire au Canada et les associations universitaires en histoire au Canada. Je ne vous cacherai pas ma fierté dans le fait que nous avons pu organiser cette journée. C'est la première fois, du moins depuis la création de la Fédération des sociétés d'histoire du Québec, que nous réussissons à réunir autant d'acteurs importants dans la diffusion de l'histoire au Canada. Plusieurs d'entre vous ont un passé et une histoire qui démontrent que les sociétés d'histoire de votre territoire ont une expérience très ancienne, que des professeurs d'université ont établi des ponts entre l'étude scolaire de l'histoire et la recherche citoyenne en histoire. Cette grande diversité démontre aussi que l'étude de l'histoire au Canada, qu'elle soit locale, régionale ou provinciale, est riche et diversifiée. La Fédération Histoire Québec and our partners of the Canadian Historical Society are so happy to welcome you to this first symposium of historical studies gathering university associations and federations of Canadian historical societies. This is an exceptional moment because it's the first time, at least since the creation of the federation, that provincial associations would work together. In this symposium, I talk about our common goals, different approaches, and experiences. We wish to establish some common practices and use our shared experience to, I hope, help us build bridges, allowing us to work together to the future and lead us to a better mutual understanding. Aujourd'hui, la rencontre à laquelle nous participons permet aussi de voir qu'il nous est tous possible de travailler ensemble afin que dans les prochaines années, les recherches des uns puissent profiter aux autres. Que nous œuvrions dans le milieu citoyen ou dans le milieu universitaire, nous avons tous un même but, celui de faire avancer les connaissances que nous avons sur notre territoire et notre histoire. À partir de ce but, nous avons tous aussi ce même objectif que celui de la diffusion de cette connaissance. Cette rencontre est l'occasion de bâtir des ponts entre nous, mais aussi de partager des préoccupations dont plusieurs sont probablement communes. Ce sera aussi un temps privilégié pour participer et partager nos façons de faire qui diffèrent souvent puisqu'elles sont issues d'expériences diversifiées. Ce partage, cette collaboration nous permettront, je l'espère, des échanges qui perdureront dans le temps, permettant ainsi une meilleure compréhension mutuelle. À toutes et à tous, je souhaite un très bon colloque. To each and all, I wish a good and interesting symposium. Alain, c'est toi qui commences avec la genèse et le contexte?
Oui, je vais présenter le contexte de cette rencontre et j'ai une petite présentation. Alors donc, je suis très content, effectivement, de participer à cette première rencontre. En fait, Jean-Louis, je ne veux pas te scooper, mais c'est depuis le 19e siècle, en fait, il n'y a jamais eu de rencontre comme aujourd'hui entre les sociétés d'histoire provinciale, territoriale et les sociétés, l'association, la Société historique du Canada, les professionnels. Donc, c'est vraiment une première canadienne et je pense qu'on peut être assez fiers qu'il y a 7 organisations aujourd'hui qui viennent discuter ensemble de ce projet. Alors donc, juste pour dire un peu pourquoi ou d'où vient cette idée-là, donc il y a 2 axes de réflexion qui ont donné naissance à ce projet-là. D'une part, un projet de recherche qui s'appelle Agent mémoriel, un engagement citoyen d'hier aujourd'hui, dans lequel moi, je participe, et Marie-France Charette aussi, et la Fédération Histoire Québec, donc qui est un projet de recherche partagé, si on veut, entre des chercheurs et la Fédération, qui regarde en fait toute la notion de participation citoyenne en histoire et patrimoine. Et parallèlement à ça, c'est un premier axe, donc qui est un projet qui roule depuis 2019 et dans le contexte, autrement dit, aussi du 100e anniversaire de la Société historique du Canada. Alors, on avait proposé l'idée d'organiser à Steven et à Michel une rencontre, autrement dit, des sociétés d'histoire ou de leur fédération provinciale, territoriale et aussi, bien entendu, les organisations professionnelles, dans le but, effectivement, de jeter des ponts, donc de voir comment on peut collaborer, développer ensemble, autrement dit, une meilleure production historienne à travers le Canada. Alors, le projet a été soumis et approuvé par le conseil d'administration de la HSC en décembre 21. Steven a aussi présenté ce projet-là dans le magazine Histoire Québec, qui a été publié en printemps 22. Donc, c'est le webinaire aujourd'hui et le premier pas. Et une rencontre de travail est prévue, donc, le 22 mai prochain, pour aller plus loin, puis étendre, autrement dit, à l'ensemble des provinces et territoires. So, just a few words on our research project titled Agents of Memory, a Citizen Engagement from Yesterday to Today. It was launched in 2019 by a team from Laboratoire d'Histoire et de Patrimoine de Montréal. We are looking for two dimensions of this question of engagement. First, a history of citizen participation in history and heritage, from antiquarians to citizen history or to contemporary practices, as well as an assessment of contemporary contributions of historical societies and heritage association to Quebec memory. So until now, we published a special file in Histoire Québec, as well as papers in Capot-Diamant, and also did many communication in various conferences, CHA, International Federation of Public History, Fédération Histoire Québec, and so on and so forth. Le fondement conceptuel est le suivant, en fait. Je pense que c'est un peu ce qui amène la réflexion aujourd'hui, c'est que donc, depuis longtemps, les sociétés d'histoire ont été des agents dans la construction d'une mémoire collective et contribuent au savoir du passé. Mais jusqu'à date, les études sur la pratique de l'histoire ont généralement porté sur sa professionnalisation ou sa disciplinarisation, on pourrait dire, insistant sur une dichotomie entre professionnels et amateurs. Mais l'émergence depuis les années 2000-2010 des sciences citoyennes favorise un nouveau regard sur cet apport citoyen-là. Et donc, des appels se multiplient, par exemple, pour participer à la transcription d'archives, etc. Mais ça va au-delà de ça, dans la mesure où il y a aussi un travail d'élaborer des nouveaux narratifs. Et donc, en définissant cet apport-là comme une contribution citoyenne, ça nous permet donc de développer les ponts, mais aussi de comprendre les dynamiques, etc. Donc, de pouvoir travailler ensemble, en définitive, à un meilleur... so this last slide is about what the ongoing research. So, for example, on the historical evolution of citizen history, we found like 4 periods or 4 phases, from antiquarian to regionalist to local and citizen. We also worked on the history of Fédération Histoire Québec, as well as doing an ongoing research on historiography of parish histories in Quebec. And we also have an engagement project, which is a citizen science project funded by FRQ last year and this year, which aim to do regional portraits of historical societies' contribution to collective memory, as well as a national survey. So, as a kind of, enfin, en guise de conclusion, je pourrais souhaiter que la conversation qui commence aujourd'hui se poursuive, dans le fond, annuellement, et qu'on puisse savoir, autrement dit, les enjeux des différentes sociétés à travers le Canada, à travers une publication, par exemple, etc. On vous invite aussi à un colloque qui va se tenir à l'automne prochain sur la participation citoyenne en histoire et patrimoine. Cette rencontre va avoir lieu à Montréal et à Québec. Et donc, c'est un partenariat qui implique le laboratoire, la fédération, enfin, et qui est financé par le CRSH. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Alain. Maintenant, on va passer à la présentation par des organisateurs. On commencerait par M. Stephen Hyde pour la Société d'histoire du Canada et ensuite Mme Marie-France Charette pour la Fédération Histoire Québec. Merci.
Bon, merci Jean-Louis, c'est vraiment apprécié et merci à tout le monde d'être ici aujourd'hui, ici dans cet espace immatériel. Je veux remercier vraiment Alain et Marie-France pour initier ce projet-là. Je pense que c'est un projet important et c'est important pour ce moment ici. You know, I think it's an important initiative, particularly in the times that we're living in. I thought I just would start with like a little story. I think each of us, you know, became a historian. We each have our own story of how we became a historian. And I'm an oral historian, so I like stories. And so my story originated in my hometown historical society, where I was hired as an oral historian for a minimum wage. I think it was $3.15 an hour at the time. To interview old people. And so they gave me a pile of analog cassettes and they said, go interview old people. So I spent the summer interviewing about 40 people, and I fell in love with history. And it sort of taught me that, you know, sometimes we think history is up there, you know, beyond our reach. It's sort of intangible. It's sort of owned by other people. And I think it taught me that history inhabits each of us, and it inhabits the communities that we live in. And I think that's an important thing. So the idea of sort of citizen history, as Alain's talking about, really appeals to me. And as part of, you know, being president of the CHA, I've been having to go back through, you know, and it was the 200th or 100th anniversary last year. I went through the first sort of presidential address, and in 1922, the president of the CHA talked about how important it was for professional historians and historians located outside of universities to work together, right? So there wasn't that separation, I think, that we've seen since, although I think there's a lot of overlap, obviously. And so the idea that history isn't just a disciplinary practice, but a societal sort of project, I think, is really important. And I think it's one of the reasons why I find this initiative so important. So we were asked to sort of introduce our societies. And so I'll say a little bit about the CHA. So the CHA consists of 750 you know, historians who are mainly located in universities, but also in other public history institutions. It also includes a lot of graduate students, sort of emergent scholars. We are an intellectual community, but I think we're also an intergenerational community, that mentoring the next generation is a big part of what we do. And I think, thirdly, I think we're also a community of friends, you might say, that we, you know, we went to grad school together. There's a lot of social connections. So when you go to a Canadian Historical Association conference, and we're having our first in-person conference at York this summer, there's a lot of history, even within, you know, between our membership, that I think is really important to acknowledge. We are a professional association, so we spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, training and advocacy, how to make sure that we defend the interests of history teaching in the country. And there's been a lot of issues that we've been dealing with in the past year, including issues of access to information, which is sort of a misnomer, as well as access period in the context of the pandemic and so on, which has had a very difficult, it's been very difficult for graduate students in particular, who have a very limited time frame to be able to access and do the work that they had planned. We've worked around issues of government policy. We're issuing a statement next week with the various archival associations, including the Quebec one, around the Canadian government's sort of museum policies and just how important archives are as sort of like heritage and history infrastructure, right? They make everything else possible, yet they are terribly underfunded. And so we are talking about issues like that, or even something, you know, as simple as, you know, like Juno Beach, which of course is a site of remembering for Canada in France, and the condoization of that. So we joined with the Juno Center in order to try to defend, you know, that space, you know, and what that space can do, you know, in terms of teaching us about the history of World War II and so on. Some of the specific issues I think I want to talk about, this is the next thing that we were asked to do. I think I'm finding a lot of hope, you know, in this moment. I think that we're seeing a lot of demographic changes within the history profession. I think for a long time, historians were more white, to put it bluntly, than other disciplines, and I think that structured a little bit how we understood history, how we interpreted history. And so what we're seeing today is the first, you know, wave of Indigenous and Black scholars, like big wave, right? Of course, there were Indigenous and Black historians before, but now we're seeing larger numbers finding permanent positions. And I think this is really changing the conversation and is raising new questions about what a historian's role is, what our relationship is to the communities that we study, thinking about power and so on, that historians are not outside of power structures, right? That we are, you know, we are very much, you know, products of our times, right? Which seems seems to me to be clear. And so I think I'm finding a lot of hope there, right? But of course, with this, you know, this change, it's unsettling, right? You know, there's a questioning that's going on, which creates debate and discussion, which I think is a positive thing. Another issue that we're chewing on a lot is precarity. That what we're finding is that a lot of universities are shifting towards contingent faculty, so non-permanent staff. And so you're seeing more and more historians who are living under the poverty line and having to cobble together different contracts and so on. And this is, you know, very, you know, very problematic. And I think it also has an impact in terms of our capacity, right, to do historical research, right? There are fewer people who have, you know, employment stability, right, in order to do this kind of long-term work that we need to do. And so I've been spending a lot of time like thinking through issues of precarity. And the other issue I think it's impacting us is on precarity is that we're seeing, you know, a shift in the universities away from the humanities, right? So they're tending to invest money in areas that where there's more financial return, for example, or that's shiny and new and seems like it's you know, if it's digital, therefore it's good kind of thing. And so what we're seeing is declining numbers of history professors overall. And it's also impacting, I think, students, right? We're seeing some declining enrollment in history programs across the country. And so the ones sort of large history programs are getting smaller, right? As are a lot of history departments, which has an impact, right? In terms of, you know, the study of Canada or the study of the world in Canada. There is also the issue of the PhD, right? We just had a task force on the future of the PhD that just made a report, and I think it should be compulsory reading for every historian in the country. Like our PhDs tended to be organized around the idea of training professors, the next generation of professors, yet we're training people for, you know, a career that is largely impossible to get, right? Or very, very difficult. And we have numbers, right? Like it's, you know, 16% is the hot, you know, for Canadian history. So Canadian history graduates with a PhD, only 16% land tenure track jobs. And that's much better than if you studied any other part of the world where it's like 2% or 4%. Actually landing a job. And so we need to rethink the PhD programs to think about, you know, what are we trying to do with them, right? And what's this for? And what are we promising people? Because of course these are long, you know, it's a long commitment for people, right? A PhD program. of course, a lot of original research, right, in Canadian history, for example, originates in those theses, right? Theses. And so what does that do? And the final point, I think, in terms of problems I raise would be, just that we're living in a time of extreme political polarization, where the history culture wars are putting historians, either community-based historians or university-based historians, into the crossfire, and so everything that we do becomes very politically charged. And so I think the value of historical societies is to have that sort of deeper training, that deeper a safe space to sort of reflect and to have dialogue and to raise questions and so on. I think is so important, and I think this has an impact again on history departments. At Laurentian University, we saw them close out 3 of their 4 history programs just last year, the 2 graduate programs in French and English, as well as the undergraduate French program in history. And so history is being targeted, and part of that is political, I think, and part of that is, I think, economic. Next steps, I think this meeting is important. It's important to open this conversation. As Jean-Louis was saying, that this is a long overdue conversation. I think the schism between, community-based and university-based historians has weakened us all to some degree, that we are stronger together, that we can learn a lot from each other. Certainly in the academic university realm, there's more and more emphasis being placed on going public, right? Engaging with wider publics. And I think university-based historians can learn a lot, frankly, from historical societies and how you have gone public, right, and work with varying audiences, right, in very very important, productive ways. And I have various ideas of how we might go forward, right? Whether it's how we might open spaces, right, where we can hear from each other, but also to make visible, right? Like I would love, for example, like provincial historical societies to have an annual little updates, right, within our newsletter, right? So that way all academic historians see, right, very clearly the work that you're doing. I think there's all kinds of ways that we can make this kind of work visible, and then ways to sort of work together while recognizing that we're also doing different things, right? And that we have different mandates, different communities of practice to some extent. Je vais terminer ici et je vous remercie vraiment pour être ici aussi. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Ike. Maintenant, on va passer la parole à Marie-France Charette.
Merci, Jean-Louis. Most of my presentation will be in French, but I will begin in English and I will do my best. This year, the Fédération Histoire Québec has adopted a new vision and a new mission to guide its actions. The Federation wants to exercise a leadership role in civic action and popular education in the fields of history and heritage in Quebec. The mission we pursue is to bring together social actors in the history and heritage of Quebec, promote local, regional, and national history, as well as other aspects of cultural heritage. And the Federation supports its members through its actions and representations while highlighting their activities. These are the principles that guides our actions. Contrary to what one might think, we are not a recognized heritage organization, but a national cultural leisure organization. We receive our accreditation from le ministère de l'Éducation, but the funding comes from the ministère de la Culture, donc education for the recognition and culture for the funding. It's like sitting between 2 chairs. Especially for projects, when we're presenting some projects. For the first time this year, and for probably the next 4 years, We are also recognized by the Quebec Autonomous Community Action Network. It comes with fundings to the mission up to $25,000 per year. For our editing activities, we receive from Canadian Heritage, from the Canada Periodical Fund Aid to Publisher Program, funding for the magazine Histoire Québec. I hope that everybody here know this magazine, our magazine. We organize two important events each year. The Congress of the Federation over 2 or 3 days for the annual general meeting, and a fall colloquium, which for the past few years have focused on our research projects. Membership represents 20% of our budget of more or less $300,000 a year. The civic action of the Federation revolves around its Heritage Committee. Dozens of cases are brought by our member organization and are processed by the committee. Letters of support, attendance at municipal council meetings with mayors, deputies, and ministers, all actions are considered. It is the most active committee of the Federation. With regard to the mission of popular education, the Federation offers its members a wide range of services and training. For example, civil security insurance for administrators and managers, up to training on social networks, sound governance, fundraising. The demands are many and varied. We have taken the first digital shift during the pandemic, like you all, I presume. The challenge has been to bring our member organization with us and give them the tools they need to face this extraordinary situation. Today, we are reaping the fruits of our efforts and of those of our governments who have supported us in this heavy task. Speaking of government, we of course keep an eye on the politics that governs cultural heritage of all kinds. Political representation are also frequent, and especially during changes of government and representatives. We like to think of it as another facet of our popular education mission. Maintenant, les enjeux de la Fédération. Tout du long, vous verrez que les enjeux de la Fédération sont pratiquement les mêmes que celles de ses sociétés membres. Au niveau du bénévolat, le renouvellement du CA et des différents comités de la Fédération est très difficile. Le recrutement se fait sur du long terme et à l'année longue, et beaucoup d'efforts sont mis là-dessus. Au niveau de la relève, tant pour le CA et les activités de la Fédération que pour nos sociétés, la préoccupation de la relève est un bruit de fond persistant. Il y a des études à la Fédération, des sondages qui montrent que déjà en 1969, quelques années après la fondation de la Fédération, la relève était une préoccupation de tous. Au niveau de la relève aussi, je voulais ajouter que depuis, je vous dirais, quelques années, depuis la pandémie, la relève, ou enfin ceux qui écoutent les messages de la Fédération, si on pense aux réseaux sociaux et à nos différents moyens de communication, cette écoute-là, les personnes qui nous écoutent ont légèrement rajeuni. La Fédération est en train de développer un auditoire, enfin, oui, je vais appeler ça comme ça, un auditoire entre 35 et 44 ans. Par contre, les gens qui sont dans l'action ont 65 ans et plus. Donc, on se fie sur nos retraités pour poser les gestes et être présents dans nos comités. Le financement, bien sûr, est un enjeu autant pour la Fédération, pour le financement à sa mission, aux différents projets et aussi assurer son développement. À chaque fois qu'on trouve une solution pour la Fédération, on essaie aussi de la transposer à nos sociétés. Donc, nos sociétés qu'on représente, qui ont des centres d'archives, qui ont des centres de documentation et qui occupent l'ère sociale, le milieu social dans lequel elles évoluent, on a besoin encore une fois de les soutenir dans leur façon de trouver du financement. Et ça, c'est une préoccupation de tous les instants à la Fédération. Au niveau de la gouvernance aussi, bien que la Fédération fait des grands pas ces dernières années, nous avons au CA de la Fédération une parité homme-femme. La moyenne d'âge a sensiblement baissé. Et à chaque année, les administrateurs sont tenus de suivre une formation en saine gouvernance. Nous préparons nos sociétés à avoir les mêmes outils de gestion. Donc, on a à les former à chaque outil de gestion qui est développé par la Fédération. Pour la Fédération, on s'assure que nos sociétés membres y ont également accès. J'ai parlé du virage numérique. C'était aussi vrai pour la Fédération qui s'apprête à changer d'image, à changer de site web, à changer de moyens de communication avec ses membres et à mieux refléter l'action de ses membres par ces moyens-là. C'est un vaste virage qu'on va compléter dans les 12 prochaines années. Je n'ai pas besoin de répéter que pour nos sociétés, c'est la même chose. On a besoin de les amener avec nous dans ce nouveau virage-là. Et le site web qu'on va leur présenter va leur faire une place prépondérante et vont les amener justement à nous suivre dans ces changements-là. Pour les pistes d'action, je suis d'accord avec Alain. La recherche que l'on fait présentement avec le projet Agent mémoriel et le projet Engagement, depuis les tout débuts, ça a été pour moi le moyen de valoriser et de donner à nos sociétés membres une petite dose d'estime d'elles-mêmes, d'estime de soi, en valorisant ce qu'ils font, en même temps en touchant une relève qui provient des milieux universitaires et des milieux de la recherche. Et ce n'est pas d'hier que cette collaboration-là existe. Ce qu'on veut faire, c'est la rendre évidente, la rendre indispensable et jeter des ponts qui vont être durables entre nos sociétés, les milieux de la pratique et les milieux de la recherche. C'est la piste d'action qu'on propose aujourd'hui. Research projects such as Agent mémoriel et Engagement, in which the Federation is involved, could represent a potential course of action to get closer and to highlight together the work of historical society and heritage organizations across the country. This is what we want to do for our member organization, and we invite you to do it with us. Thank you.
Merci, Marie-France. For Nova Scotia Historical Society, Mrs. Lois York, it's you.
Merci beaucoup. I will be speaking en anglais with apologies. The Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society goes back to its founding in 1878. That makes us 145 years old. And my presentation is going to look back so that we can all begin to see forward. And of course, we are a provincial organization. We are much smaller. We have to struggle. Throughout those 145 years, we've consistently published available papers from the Society's monthly meetings. In the collections at first, there's 44 volumes of them. And now annually since 1998, the journal with 25 volumes. Publication has been in hard copy until now. The journal is currently in transition to digital. We're joining the modern age. And we are doing this in 2024 in partnership with RUD. And we are very pleased with that partnership. The Society has perhaps always been a creature of its time. It began as an offshoot of the Victorian age, the emphasis then on exploring, learning, and educating others, and as part of a wider regional movement in the United States at the time of the American centenary to record and celebrate the colonial past. The model in Nova Scotia was particularly the Massachusetts Historical Society, which goes back to 1791. The founding members in 1878 here were all male, all from Halifax's intellectual, legal, and mercantile elite. There were no women, even though there was no stated objection to them, and there were no members from outside Halifax. The original objectives were specific, but antiquarian by our modern standards, and I will not read them, but you can imagine what they were like. In the early days, our society shared common interests with other like-minded organizations in Canada. The papers explored themes such as loyalty and patriotism, settlement and development, especially pioneers and at the community level, ethnicity, especially Black and Indigenous peoples, but from intensely colonial perspectives, and explorations of the great man trope in politics, business, and industry. Well into the 20th century, the society remained metrocentric, male-dominated, and heavily populated by academics. The respect for British tradition continued unabated, and the Society's centenary in 1978 was celebrated by obtaining the official designation Royal. A good snapshot of the membership demographic emerges from the glacial entry of women into the life of our society. The first woman to have a paper accepted for presentation at a monthly meeting, 1879. That's early, but she lived outside Halifax. She wasn't a member, and her paper was read by a man. First woman to have a paper published in the collections, 1881. Early again, but it's the same woman, and she's still not a member. First woman member, 1892. First woman to present a paper in person, 1898. First woman on the executive, 1929. The first woman to be president, 2004. That's less than 20 years ago. And I'm now the third president who's a woman. By the early 21st century, the Society's vision, values, and social attitudes were changing noticeably. The old objectives had been condensed into a tagline, preserving and promoting the history of Nova Scotia. Younger scholars were encouraged. And there was diversification into new kinds of history, revisionist, public, explorations of cultural diversity, etc. En anglais, we say hindsight is 2020. And so by that year, in keeping with similar exercises across the country, the Society decided to examine its small but lengthy role in shaping the interpretation of Nova Scotia's settler historical narrative. In an environmental scan in 2021 revealed that our roots were definitely showing. Membership hovers around 200 people, but is dwindling. Sometimes now there are more women on the executive than men, but it's harder to attract any volunteers. There are more what I call outboard general members, including from outside the province, but it's challenging to retain them as it is to attract students, new Canadians, the gender diverse, and other communities who might be interested in how Nova Scotia's present has been shaped by its past. In short, it's difficult to remain visible and relevant in a world that's dominated by social media and what's happening right this minute. We call this in the Society the way forward exercise. It's moved slowly during the pandemic, but its final report will be released later this month. It includes 15 recommendations for the general membership of the society to vote upon. And buried in those recommendations are lessons and opportunities that I can share with the broader heritage community. Highlights from the report. Thanks to the pandemic, we've embraced technology, and we intend to keep our new hybrid delivery model. We used to be afraid of microphones and overhead projectors. We now move nimbly through Zoom meetings and recording lectures for our dedicated YouTube channel. And Eastlink, the cable people, film at the back of the room for distribution on their broad community television network. Instead of monthly meetings in the Red Chamber at the Nova Scotia Legislature, only 275 years old, or at the Nova Scotia Archives, we've now found a new perch at Halifax's Central Library, one of the community's busiest, newest, and most innovative. We're there once a month. Our Community Grants Initiative has just completed its second year of reaching out to the provincial heritage community. We offer small grants to heritage organizations or to individuals undertaking specialized research. We also plan to explore holding monthly meetings and lectures outside Halifax, paired with local museums or like-minded organizations. And we're working to broaden our lecture program so that it includes more current and more controversial topics presented by younger or emerging scholars. Last night was a good example. The young Indigenous advisor at one of the local universities presented a sobering reflection on what he called the Donald Marshall undecision of 1999 and how it crystallized yet again the federal government's failure to recognize and uphold the rights of First Nations. And so, in conclusion, after 145 years, the Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society has left behind the 19th and the 20th centuries. It has embraced the 21st, and it intends to continue moving forward. Doing so, we hope, in step with other like-minded organizations across this large and very diverse country. Merci. Thank you for today's opportunity to share our story.
Thank you, Mrs. York. For Manitoba Historical Society is Mrs. Tracy Turner.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Tracy. I'm the Executive Director of the Manitoba Historical Society, and I'm very pleased to be here today connecting and sharing with you for the very first time. I think this is a really celebratory occasion to get to meet all of my colleagues here today. So I hope and trust that we will do this more as a historical community. So thank you for this opportunity. I'd also like to share that I live, work, and am speaking to you today on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis. I acknowledge that our water is gratefully sourced from the Shoal Lake First Nation, and I am respectful of the treaties that were made here, and I acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities, and the MHS is working in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Today, I'd like to begin with a very brief history of the Manitoba Historical Society, and then I'll situate us into the present time of the MHS and share about some of the amazing work that we're doing and the exciting projects that we currently are working on. I'll speak to our resilience as an organization, talk about how the MHS has begun to pivot through time, to persist, and continue to valuably contribute to the historical record. Finally, I'll wrap up with sharing some of our challenges that we're having or are facing currently, and how the MHS hopes to transcend these challenges through organizational change, evolution, and pivoting how we deliver our content and service as a membership history organization. So we were founded in 1879. The Manitoba Historical Society began as the Historical and Scientific Society of Manitoba. And with a name like this, you can tell that we had a very broad mandate. The foundation of the society at that time was to pursue truth. And the society embodied a significant mission, education, and to advance the nation. Our society at that time was made up of around 500 professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, clergymen, accountants, civil engineers, and 1/3 were clearly members of our business community, whether they be merchants, real estate dealers, or bankers. Thus, over 80% of our members at our founding were businessmen and professionals, very male-dominated, and our founding membership was evident of a select group. Our mission and accomplishments of the MHS have changed through time. Early on in 1886, the most important work that was being accomplished was the organization of sponsored lectures, organizing an archaeological and geological museum, organizing art exhibitions, and most importantly, establishing a public library. At that time, the library held over 10,000 volumes. The mission at that time was to create and sustain a strong literate culture in Manitoba. So looking back, the mission of the MHS was threefold: a public relations organization, a scientific institute, and a cultural and educational communicator. Over time, the MHS has experienced peaks and valleys in membership, but accompanying this was always a time of reaction, pivoting, and growth. And as time has passed, much of the great accomplishments of the MHS became the founding collections of many of the archival organizations that exist in Winnipeg today. Our library became a founding collection for the Carnegie Library back in 1905. Our geology collections became parts of the collections that established comparative collections at the University of Manitoba Geological Sciences. Many of our museum collections, consisting of natural and ethnographic materials, became founding collections for the Manitoba Museum. And many of our archival collections became founding collections at the Manitoba Archives. Through the decades, the MHS established many programs, and a prominent one was to commemorate sites and events in Manitoba history. As the composition of the society changed towards the 1940s, the society came to have a much more educational focus, likely because the composition of the society became 25% teachers and had a heavy influence from the work of Margaret McWilliams, an educator, and many women. But moreover, what you see when you look back through the timeline was the dedication of individuals to creating and documenting history and the lasting impact they had. Since 1879, the Manitoba Historical Society has been committed to this mission to foster the preservation of property relevant to an appreciation of the history of Manitoba, to encourage research and publications related to the history of Manitoba, to promote and encourage public interest in Manitoba and Canadian history broadly, and to assist in the formation and activities of local history societies in furthering the objectives of our society in Manitoba. Post-war, the MHS Society pressed the government for the establishment of a proper provincial archives. Devotion to scholarship and archaeology by our society encouraged archaeological work in Manitoba to eventually create the Department of Anthropology and the establishment of the Manitoba Archaeological Society in 1960. The society played a significant role in the preservation of built heritage, and one example of this is Down-the-Vert House. The society continues to advocate for the preservation of built heritage province-wide, but one of our strengths and constants through time has been in our publications. In 1879, one of the first initiatives of the newly formed Manitoba Historical and Scientific Society was support for public lectures on ranges of topics. These lectures were later published as the Transactions of the MHS and Scientific Society, or Transactions for short. 72 transactions were published by 1909. This was considered the first series. The second series, published between the World Wars, was 1926 to 1936. And the third series of transactions was published starting in 1944. These are all available digitally on our website. The Society's award-winning magazine, Manitoba Pageant, was introduced in 1956 as a complement to Transactions and was published until 1979. Then in 1980, our publication in color, Manitoba History, was launched. Manitoba History was published as a peer-reviewed scholarly journal that had feature-length articles as well as shorter, popular articles, documentary selections, essays, pictorial essays, and reviews related to the social, economic, political, intellectual, and cultural history of Manitoba and the Canadian West. Manitoba History was published from 1980 to 2019. Manitoba History replaced our previous publications and is also available digitally and in print on our website. With a need to innovate and expand our mandate and content and continue research and education to fulfill our missions, in 2020, with a public reception, we launched the journal Prairie History. Published by the MHS, our current publication combines scholarly articles, popular history, as well as book reviews and specialty pieces. It also features the Prairie Gazette, a heritage newsletter, as part of each issue. Prairie History is the only journal in Canada to combine diverse approaches in one place. Prairie History covers the histories of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, as well as the U.S. borderlands. Our goal is to publish the latest and best original work of young and experienced scholars, professionals, and amateurs, as well as heritage news, commentaries related to archival and museum collections across the West. Prairie History is illustrated and published in full color, print, and digital formats on our website. So present day, we currently are proud of our circulation of Prairie History that has an approximate readership of 790,000 people. The MHS holds fast to our mandate of our founders, continuing our legacy of preservation, promotion, research, and education. Our award programs recognize the work of Manitoba youth through the Young Historians Awards program. Our Centennial Business, Organizations, and Farm Awards commemorate farms, businesses, and organizations that have operated continuously for 100 years or more. And we are advocates for preserving our province's built heritage. We actively research, record, and maintain an archive of publications, people, events, and historic sites in Manitoba history on our website. And we are very proud of our website at mhs.ca. It's an incredible resource. And as we've moved away from establishing libraries physically, our digital library and our digital footprint is rich and growing every day. Last year, our website had nearly 2 million views. Our YouTube followers reach over 3.6 thousand viewers. So our mission now is simply sharing history digitally and in print, of course. We've established a database of Manitoba historic sites that include over 9,000 sites and growing. The Manitoba Historical Society website hosts an extensive archive that includes interactive and searchable listings, maps, and GPS locations of our historic sites in Manitoba. Visitors to our Historic Sites of Manitoba index page can search for buildings, cemeteries, locations, monuments, or museums and archives, including those designated as municipal, provincial, or national in significance. Through our memorable Manitobans content, our Manitoba Historical Society presents a growing collection of noteworthy Manitobans. Over 12,640 individuals right now are presented. And you can search the collections by word, phrases, names, places, or occupations. And we're very excited to share that this spring we'll be launching a new website with a new look, feel, and membership services, and of course, a store. Another very important project that we're working on currently is the development of an exhibition on Manitoba's legislative history, destined for the Manitoba Legislative Building. It will tell the story of the Manitoba Legislative Buildings and our tradition of governing in Manitoba. This exhibit is currently in development stage, and using a wide variety of stimulating and immersive and state-of-the-art multimedia, the exhibition will engage visitors within the exciting stories and personalities behind the narrative. But the potential for the exhibit could impact target audiences of over 20,000 visitors annually. So we're super excited about this. So now I'd like to just maybe conclude a bit talking about some of our common issues, concerns, and actions that we're taking with the MHS. I know we likely face a lot of common issues as a group. Our two main issues are membership and funding. It is a constant effort and struggle to understand how to define and communicate membership values and services in this time. So we have many action items currently in our strategic plan to address this. We're currently working on developing a better informed and growing membership base. We're working to enhance public appreciation of Manitoba history. We're working to advocate collaboratively with other organizations and PHAs for heritage preservation. We're working to sustain the governance and administration of our society, and we're working on practicing truth and reconciliation within our organization and our practices and content. And finally, some words about funding. This is the single most important issue for the MHS. We are at a point of growth, and as the government has stepped back from its historic resource responsibilities, aside from administration and scrutiny, groups like the MHS have a huge responsibility to continue to inventory, document, research, protect, and share the stories of our history. I would encourage you to read our past President Gordon Goldsborough's editorial in our most recent issue of Prairie History #9, entitled The State of Heritage in Manitoba, a call to action, as he lays out the history of this issue in detail. But the short end of this is that as a provincial heritage agency, we have a consistent lack of funding. The financial funding support for Manitoba's heritage is small compared to other jurisdictions across Canada, and we have declining purchasing power. Our funding has not changed in over 2 decades. We are also facing aging demographics in our membership, worker burnout. Most of our organization is peopled and fueled by volunteer efforts, and we have a need for more staff. As I am the only staff person for the MHS that's currently paid, everything else is done by a volunteer effort, and I could certainly use more support in our office. There's so much work to do, and we need more people and more funding to do it. So we're currently advocating to the provincial government for more funding through the establishment of endowment funds to provide more stable funding and consistency through time. We are working diligently to raise these issues with all levels of government and collectively with our group of provincial heritage agencies, as our lack of funding is unsustainable. So I could speak more, but I know I'm going over time. So I'd just like to say in conclusion that I really appreciate this opportunity to share what we do, who we are, and look forward to this new phase of working together as historical organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Turner. Now it's the turn of the representative of the Ontario Historical Society. Now it's Mr. Daniel Deschamps.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, I'm really pleased to be a presenter and a listener here today. So as some of you will know, the OHS works very closely with grassroots historical organizations from all across Ontario. We were founded in 1888, and we're a not-for-profit corporation and a registered charity and a non-government group. And we're dedicated to bringing people together of all ages, all walks of life, and all cultural backgrounds interested in preserving some aspect of our history. Now, we're governed by an all-volunteer board of directors, and part of what we do is really to support a vast network of member individuals, organizations, institutions, including the OHS's 350 plus affiliated societies. The OHS also works on the scholarly side of history as well. We publish a scholarly peer-reviewed journal called Ontario History, which actually went digital a couple of years ago, also through ARD. So that was great to hear. Great to hear about another great project digitizing through ARD. The OHS has done a lot of great work over the years, and we have a lot of great programs and a lot of great things that we're doing. I want to focus on our membership and their contributions, in particular to public history and bringing our history to people and promoting it and preserving it. So the OHS is unique in the sense that our Act of 1899 gives the OHS the power to incorporate not-for-profit historical organizations through affiliation with the OHS. So this responsibility empowers us with this unique perspective on the issues historical societies and institutions are facing, as well as some of the problems they're solving. When we incorporate a new group, we work with them to establish a constitution, a board of directors. We do a lot of work in promoting what they're doing in their community across the province. And we often work closely with them on planning and helping them fulfill their mandate and achieve their goals. Historical societies and local regional museums are doing incredible work, and it's really an eclectic range of work that they're doing. So it's really hard to group them all together or define their challenges all in one discussion or in one breath. But some of our groups are researching Some are publishing or maintaining in archives. Some are working to restore or defend cemeteries. Others are taking on the responsibility to try and save a physical space from destruction. In that case, whether it be a lighthouse, a train station, a caboose, a former church building, I think these assets are of great importance to the communities. And in most cases, these heritage assets, they're not just important for the historical record, but they also represent important community space in a real estate market where space is becoming increasingly difficult to access, especially for smaller groups. Also, many of our groups are taking it upon themselves to decolonize our history and to share important stories from our collective history with the public. A great example which demonstrates this work and its importance is that of our affiliate members on cemeteries and cemetery preservation, which has given us, I think, a greater understanding of Ontario's history. For example, in particular, our expanding knowledge of Black history in Canada has often been driven by local history groups and public historians who have given us important information about early Black settlements, for instance. In many cases, the cemeteries established by those early Black settlers have been very important in bringing forth important truths about our history. So I think it's really at the grassroots level that so much important research is being done, where oral history, cemetery preservation, and genealogical research have made major contributions to our knowledge of local history as historians. In a recent presentation that I attended, hosted by one of our affiliate groups, the Grey County Black Heritage Society, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine delivered a keynote speech where she spoke about the importance of public historians and grassroots history groups like the Grey County Black Heritage Society. And Dr. Augustine referenced her own experience as a teacher in Ontario, recalling that, quote, "We taught a little bit about the Underground Railroad, but it ended in Toronto," unquote. She was trying to explain that she had to really go and learn from Janie Cooper Wilson of the Silver Shoe Historical Society and Carolyn and Sylvia, who run the Sheffield Park Black History Museum, that the Underground Railroad went all the way up to Owen Sound, and that there were countless family histories and cemetery sites that really revealed so much more than what was necessarily being taught or being offered in the schools. So I think it's clear how critical our local historical societies can be in expanding public knowledge and furthering our understanding of the past. And in some cases, it's not even because the information isn't in the official history. In some cases, it is there, it's just that it's not necessarily reaching the public. And I think that's an important need that a lot of these groups are filling. In terms of challenges, I think there are so many right now, and a lot of them have been touched on by previous presenters, which I think is great because it shows that we're all experiencing some similar issues. The groups that we incorporate through the OHS, they're doing this kind of work on behalf of the community and for the public benefit, but they don't have the support that they need. They're stepping up to tell our collective stories and save our historic landmarks, archives, and cemeteries, and they're being left to do it with very few resources, and it's all being done on the backs of dedicated volunteers. The issues that our groups are facing are the same issues that we're facing at the provincial level. Our heritage is threatened by development and divestment. In most cases, funding to grassroots heritage organizations has been cut or frozen for 20 or 30 years. Property taxes are being levied against local museums that are run by volunteers, and those taxes are going up. And so, local museums and historical societies are being asked to do more with less every year. And in fact, more of them are being asked to do it. In the last 15 years, in particular, the OHS has seen a significant increase in the rate of incorporation for new historical organizations. More groups are forming because there's more work to do than ever before, as private owners, governments continue to sort of offload that responsibility of looking after local historical assets and collections. Another challenge that our groups are dealing with is that their memberships are aging and they're struggling to get younger people involved. And that may be an area where closer relationship or continued close relationship with academic historians can really help by engaging undergrads and grad students with local history opportunities and partnerships. I know public history courses being incorporated more into university history programs really sparks that interest and a mutual appreciation across the sector. Every year, the OHS takes public history student placements, and I think it's been of incredible value for everyone involved. and really shows the support of the faculty for historical societies and the work that they do on behalf of the public. In my own experience, I've seen a lot of great mutual respect between academic and public historians and a lot of great partnership there. Another trend that is really helping to build stronger bonds between the scholarly and the grassroots is a broader acceptance of oral history in academia and a greater appetite to engage and collaborate on public history projects, oral history projects, and public events. So I think continuing in that direction will definitely bring us closer, telling everyone's stories together and incorporating all perspectives whenever any of us are talking about our collective history. And finally, I've witnessed how the support and involvement of all historians in public history groups, small historical societies, and local museums really makes a big difference for the groups and the work and how much traction they get. Serving on historical society boards, getting involved with local museums and groups, really a great way, I think, to keep those pillars connected and strengthen the work that we're doing and bring a greater unity to our sector. So again, I'm very pleased to be having this discussion. I want to really say that I appreciate that this is coming into discussion. I think it's a great topic for us to be looking at, and I want to thank the CHA for hosting this and taking the initiative. I really look forward to hearing the thoughts of the other presenters today and any questions that might come afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Deschamps. Nous allons maintenant entendre Madame Brigitte Collier pour l'Institut d'histoire de l'Amérique française.
C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous. Comme vous le savez peut-être déjà, l'Institut d'histoire de l'Amérique française est actuellement la principale association des historiennes et des historiens professionnels du Québec et également des spécialistes de l'Amérique française. C'est un institut qui a été fondé en 1946 par Lionel Groux et qui regroupe donc des professeurs, des professionnels, des amateurs d'histoire aussi, provenant de toutes les régions du Canada et de l'étranger. Cependant, notre plus gros effectif vient du Québec, où il est naturel que davantage de personnes s'intéressent à ces activités, qui sont celles d'une société savante, bien impliquée dans son milieu et largement sollicitée par celui-ci. Outre qu'il publie une revue trimestrielle, la Revue d'histoire de l'Amérique française, et qu'il organise chaque année un congrès scientifique pour ses membres, l'Institut défend la place de l'histoire ainsi que celle des sciences humaines et sociales. Et il intervient également, et c'est là, je pense qu'on se rejoint pour plusieurs, dans les grands dossiers d'actualité en matière d'enseignement, de recherche, de sauvegarde du patrimoine et des archives. Enfin, chaque année, l'Institut récompense les meilleures réalisations en histoire de l'Amérique française par la remise de prix d'excellence, pour des ouvrages et des travaux qui sont aussi bien rédigés en anglais qu'en français. L'Institut est devenu au fil du temps le principal organisme de diffusion de la recherche universitaire en histoire du Québec et de l'Amérique française. Après avoir été, et on l'a déjà un peu évoqué, l'un des moteurs de la disciplinarisation de l'histoire au Québec. Dès sa création, la revue avait pour mission de fournir des articles méthodologiques pour augmenter les compétences des personnes intéressées à l'histoire, dont celles, bien naturellement, impliquées dans les sociétés historiques, qui sont bien plus anciennes au Québec que le propre Institut. Et pour avoir relu des articles des premiers numéros, je peux vous dire que cette volonté de pédagogie a chatouillé souvent les susceptibilités. Et donc, ça ne s'est pas, les échanges n'ont pas toujours été cordiaux. D'autant, et ça, certains chercheurs québécois y travaillent actuellement, que dans ces sociétés historiques, souvent des femmes avaient enfin la possibilité d'écrire l'histoire. Mais je dirais, je pense, nous partageons des enjeux communs en ce moment et nous y sommes confrontés de façon majeure. Bien des enjeux sociaux débattus actuellement révèlent la nécessité d'impliquer les historiens et les historiennes pour les comprendre. Or, malheureusement, l'histoire et les sciences humaines en général suscitent moins d'intérêt, particulièrement à l'université. Ce ne sont pas des parcours payants et les instances universitaires sont prêtes à les sacrifier, comme on a vu récemment avec l'université Laurentienne pour le secteur francophone. Et même si les autres universités n'ont pas fait d'action aussi frappante, elles tardent à remplacer les départs à la retraite. Les spécialistes d'histoire du Québec et du Canada sont de moins en moins nombreux dans les différents départements d'histoire. Or, nous savons que les étudiants et les étudiantes en histoire s'impliquent activement dans la société en général et de manière très évidente dans les sociétés historiques, que ce soit pendant ou après leurs études. En amont, cet intérêt pour l'histoire que l'on retrouve chez nos étudiants se développe à l'école et nécessite des enseignants bien formés dans la discipline pour le secondaire en particulier. Et cette formation en histoire est au cœur de nos préoccupations à l'Institut depuis plusieurs années. L'Institut fait également des interventions publiques sur des dossiers préoccupant également les sociétés historiques. Sauvegarde du patrimoine bâti, sauvegarde du patrimoine archivistique, même si nous ne prenons pas position sur des cas de patrimoine privé. Et c'est comme ça que nous nous associons à la Société historique du Canada dans bien des dossiers. Nous l'avons fait il y a quelque temps pour les archives sulpiciennes grandement menacées. De ce point de vue-là, je dirais que le patrimoine religieux a été au cœur de nos interventions, ce qui nous a amené à travailler avec le Conseil du patrimoine religieux du Québec. On n'oubliera pas non plus que l'IAF a soutenu le maintien du financement par BANQ des services d'archives privés agréés, les SAPA, souvent étroitement associés aux sociétés historiques, quand celles-ci ne les constituent pas en soi. Comme vous le voyez, j'ai pu donc vous donner à la fois des enjeux et des interventions, les réponses que nous y faisons. À notre niveau, les congrès annuels favorisent également la réflexion sur des enjeux communs comme la diffusion des connaissances historiques, la place de l'histoire dans la société. Je vous donnerai un exemple à ce propos. En 2018, le congrès de Drummondville portait sur l'histoire dans la cité et des activités avaient été organisées avec la Société d'histoire de Drummondville et ces activités étaient ouvertes aux membres respectifs de nos deux communautés. Régulièrement aussi dans les congrès, des séances portent sur la création d'outils de recherche qui sont mis à disposition du grand public. Les diplômés en histoire et dans les disciplines associées comme l'archivistique, les études patrimoniales, s'impliquent beaucoup dans les sociétés historiques, où s'y trouve un emploi, comme le constate Fernand Harvet dans le numéro de Capot Diamant consacré aux indispensables sociétés d'histoire. L'offre d'emploi de niveau universitaire s'étant rétractée, de plus en plus d'historiens et d'historiennes cherchent du travail ailleurs. Depuis 2017, l'Institut cherche à maintenir les liens avec ces personnes qui ont connu l'Institut, souvent pendant leurs études, en participant au congrès notamment. Nous avons mené une enquête pour connaître leur situation et les besoins qu'elles voudraient que l'IAF comble, pour favoriser leur participation à nos activités en tenant compte de leur situation financière précaire. Nous avons revu nos tarifs d'abonnement et d'inscription au congrès. Au total, les implications auprès des sociétés historiques locales et régionales passent surtout par les relations que nos membres eux-mêmes entretiennent avec elles. Elles sont moins, je dirais, explicites avec l'Institut comme tel. En tant qu'association professionnelle scientifique, l'Institut regroupe des membres dont la recherche entraîne des collaborations avec les sociétés locales et régionales. Et ces liens s'établissent principalement sur une base individuelle ou bien au travers de groupes et de centres de recherche. De son côté, l'Institut fédère les recherches en histoire du Québec et de l'Amérique française et en diffuse les résultats. Avec la Société historique du Canada, les échanges demeurent constants. Nous avons régulièrement un membre de notre conseil d'administration siégeant également à celui de l'ASHC. Les dossiers nous réunissent régulièrement, je vous en ai cité au moins un, pour des interventions publiques communes. En somme, je dirais que les ponts, en ce qui nous concerne, sont moins à rétablir qu'à rendre plus visibles avec les sociétés historiques locales et régionales qui se consacrent à l'histoire du Québec et de l'Amérique française.
Merci, Mme Collier. Nous passerons maintenant nous entendrons maintenant M. Denis Perrault pour le réseau Mémoire, Patrimoine et Histoire.
Merci beaucoup. Je présente un organisme, comme vous voyez à l'ordre du jour, qui est tout nouveau. Mais ce n'est pas parce qu'on est petit qu'on ne peut pas jouer avec les grands. Nous, c'est le réseau pour la mémoire, le patrimoine et l'histoire des minorités de langue officielle du Canada. Le raccourci, on dit réseau MPH. So our organization's name is the Memory, History and Heritage Network for Official Language Minorities of Canada, the MHH network. I'm not going to present bilingual in the sense of mirroring English and French. I'm just going to kind of switch from one to the other in the hopes that everybody gets a full picture. So I won't bore you with details of official language policy in Canada, but it's important to understand the dynamics because it's sort of at the heart of our organization. You need to know the expression official language minority communities, or OLMCs in French, in English, and in French, it's communauté de langues officielles en situation minoritaire, ou CLOSM. Donc, c'est très poétique comme expression. But simply put, the expression recognizes the existence of Francophone and Acadian communities outside of Quebec, as well as Anglophone communities within Quebec. So those are sort of the two population bases that form the basis of our organization. And just to sort of situate in those two community bases, there are about 2.8 million French speakers outside of Quebec. And there are about 1.1 million people with English as a first official language inside Quebec. So a sizable population all the same. Depuis 2018, un groupe d'organismes, des CLOSM, se sont rassemblés autour du réseau archivistique de Bibliothèques et Archives Canada. Et puis le travail d'Alain Roy, en particulier, salut Alain, qui a lancé son étude conceptuelle sur la vitalité mémorielle dans le contexte des communautés de langues officielles en situation minoritaire, a fait en sorte que ça crée un environnement où on voyait le potentiel de collaboration dans nos milieux qui sont quand même assez uniques. Our network is unique in our field because we cross boundaries of language and geography. We group Francophone and Acadian heritage organizations outside of Quebec, as well as Quebec Anglophone organizations within Quebec. So we're national in a different way than we see in many organizations in Canada. Notre mission est de mobiliser, soutenir et représenter les entités vouées au développement de la vitalité mémorielle et au rayonnement du secteur de la mémoire, du patrimoine et de l'histoire des communautés de langues officielles en situation minoritaire au Canada. Et on soutient le développement de ces communautés par le biais de communautés de pratique et puis l'engagement mutuel et le partage de connaissances. Donc, parmi les mandats qu'on s'est donnés, c'est de représenter nos membres et en être le porte-parole, mettre en commun des expertises pour fonder des communautés de pratique favorisant les échanges autour de mémoire, patrimoine et histoire, et puis de renforcer l'écosystème favorisant la vitalité mémorielle des communautés de langue officielle en situation minoritaire. So our membership, because we're so young organizationally, it's probably easier to speak of the organizations who participated in the creation of our network. It is interdisciplinary, so it's not just historical societies, but it's also not only GLAM organizations. It's not only university, but the university and the scholarly milieu are also inside our network. And we also have a huge diversity of approaches. So some people are more towards documentary heritage. Others are more public history and festival type organizations, as well as the classic museums, archives, research centers, etc. Just to name a few of the members to give you a sense. So I'm with the Société historique francophone de l'Alberta, the executive director. Il y a aussi la Société historique de Colombie-Britannique, Saint-Boniface, la Saskatchewan, la Société historique acadienne, la Société d'histoire francophone du Yukon, l'Association historique francophone de Victoria. Et en plus de ça, il y a le réseau du patrimoine franco-ontarien. We had the Quebec English-speaking Communities Research Network of Concordia University, who were very active in the creation of the network. The Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, la Fédération des francophones de Terre-Neuve et du Labrador, et le Centre d'études acadiennes Anselme-Chiasson à l'Université de Moncton, ainsi que la Fiducie nationale du Canada et le Centre de recherche sur les francophonies canadiennes à l'Université d'Ottawa. So, among our specific issues, our communities are very complex. So they're not defined only by language, not only by geography, not only by ethnicity or genealogy. So heritage becomes an important vector for belonging. So it's not just a question of intergenerational transmission of knowledge about history, but also people who join the community and in whom the history needs to be relevant and pertinent for them. So there is insufficient knowledge available on the way that history, about the history of our communities. Also, the larger public is unaware of the contribution of our respective communities to local, provincial, and Canadian history. And I'll speak a little bit about some of the issues along with that. I'm just gonna skip. So jumping towards possible actions, I think that the expression bridging is operative and well chosen within the context because there are many levels. So there's a level that was laid out in terms of this wonderful meeting, and it's sort of the bridging between scholarly history and community-based history. And I do think that the expression bridge is also relevant because I think it needs to be mechanisms that are constructed consciously with how are we going to meet each other. Je ne vous surprendrai pas en disant qu'on a des défis reliés au fait que entre le Québec francophone et le reste du Canada francophone, on a besoin de ponts. On n'est pas très bien connu au Québec en termes de la réalité historique et contemporaine des communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada. Il y a la question linguistique. So just in terms of production, when we are producing in French in our local communities, for example, in Alberta, that means that people who don't speak the language, people who are, and it means that they limit their access to secondary sources as well as primary sources. You can see research being done, for example, on church history in Alberta by people who don't know how to read French sources, which means that they're unable to tap into a lot of the Catholic Church sources. So that's just an example of where that the kind of solitudes, to borrow an expression, becomes relevant. J'ai souvent été, une chose en termes de solution. Une solution, je pense que c'est très facile de construire des ponts entre la communauté puis les universités, tout simplement en dirigeant les étudiants vers les sociétés historiques lorsque c'est leur choix de sujet. J'ai récemment eu 2 étudiantes qui ont juste trouvé notre société historique par hasard et ils voulaient de l'aide pour la recherche pour des dissertations, etc. Donc ça, c'est une façon qui est facile et productive pour les enjeux de relève ainsi que créer des chercheurs futurs. I've also been on steering committees for juries for community-based research projects, and it gave me an interesting vantage point. And I would make 2 observations related to that experience. On the one hand, researchers often go ahead with the research and don't allow the community to help define the research questions. So that is one way that bridges can be built between the two communities. Also, there is, and this is a pickle because it's hard to figure out how to bridge this, but I've been in many academic conferences where I really wish there was more community people hearing what was being spoken, but they don't feel like it's their place. Just like I've had community-based research presented in which there's nobody from the university community that's there to find out about this new research. So that's another area where there could be a lot of future solutions. Donc, merci pour la chance de vous partager nos réalités, nos enjeux.
Merci, M. Perrault. Nous allons donc conclure, si vous voulez bien. J'aimerais remercier tous les participants et participantes à cette première rencontre des fédérations d'histoire et associations d'universitaires en histoire. Pendant ces quelques heures, nous avons fait un pas de plus pour mieux nous connaître et pour partager nos expériences. J'en retire que malgré des expériences et des environnements différents, nous avons des vies associatives qui ont plusieurs points en commun. Je retiens aussi que nous pouvons tous prendre exemple de ce qui se fait chez nos collègues afin d'améliorer notre efficacité. Mais par-dessus tout, ce que je retiens, c'est que cette première expérience de travail ensemble est très fructueuse et nous ouvre des portes à d'autres collaborations. À tous, je souhaite une très bonne fin de journée. J'espère vous revoir en mai. Merci de votre participation. Merci.